celebration, as Sarah said, of our nation's birthday of Independence Day. And in addition to the 3-day weekend, I hope you had some time to reflect on the blessing of being able to live in a free country and remember the cost of such blessings. So as most of you know, I spent the month of June on a sabbatical. And as part of that sabbatical, Mary and I traveled to a number of sites that are connected to the early history of the founding of our country. Went to Jamestown and Williamsburg, Yorktown, Monticello, Mount Vernon, and Washington, D.C. It was a great opportunity to look back at some of the most significant figures and places and ideas that were instrumental in the creation of a new nation conceived in liberty, dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. I have to add that throughout our trip, especially during our time in D.C., I was reminded of my mother. My mom was a high school teacher who mostly taught American history and government. And for many years, she took students from her classes to Washington, D.C. so they could learn more about the foundations and the formation of our government, and get to observe and even experience up close the workings of government. She began her teaching career about the same time I began college, so I never got to go on one of her trips, but I heard plenty about politics and government in conversations at home. And even though I grew up out west, where you can often hear that government is the problem, not the solution, my mom was an insistent reminder that ours is a government of and by and for the people, and that we must do our part to engage in the process of governance, lest others take it over who are not concerned with the public good, but only with lining their own pockets and protecting their own power. Over and over, as Mary and I were touring these historical sites, one word kept coming up: liberty. Whether it was in a famous quotation, such as the one I used earlier from Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, or inscribed on a monument, or mentioned in a speech by an actor portraying a historical figure, or just part of the patter of a tour guide, the word liberty kept popping up. That makes perfect sense, of course, since much of what we were visiting related to the time of the Revolutionary War, the war our founders fought to gain our independence from the British Crown. And the words of the Declaration of Independence came up repeatedly. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What did the authors of the Declaration of Independence mean by liberty? We can tell from the Declaration itself. The primary idea they insisted upon, as indicated by the listing of their grievances, was freedom from tyranny. And tyranny meant the rule of an oppressive and abusive sovereign, in this case, King George III. And that tyranny was evidenced primarily in 5 main ways. There was oppressive and unfair laws that didn't benefit the people who had to live under those laws, but made their lives more difficult. There was excessive and repressive taxes that crippled the local and colonial economies, stymied the people's ability to develop their communities and defend for themselves. Thirdly, they were controlling the means of commerce so that the goods and services benefited the king and those in England, while restricting and limiting the colonies' trade and commercial enterprises, thus stifling their ability to prosper. Fourth, there was an enactment of the king's decrees and laws without the consent of the people or their representatives, and enforcement by means of military force, as if the colonists were a conquered enemy, and inciting insurrections that endangered the welfare of the people, violently attacking them and plundering their coasts and towns and the seas. Such government, they said, constitutes tyranny, and from such tyranny, the founders sought to be freed. Now, at the same time, there was another liberty which the American founding fathers sought to establish, not a freedom from, but a freedom to. That was with regard to religious worship and practice. The freedom to worship God according to one's personal conscience, rather than according to the king's command, and to have churches which were independent of the crown's control, was a crucial aspect of the liberty that was prized by the founders. This conviction was fundamental to the nature of this country's union. It was first enshrined in the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, and then became part of the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights. And And the inclusion of the freedom of religion in the foundational documents of our nation guaranteed that Americans would be free to worship according to the dictates of their own consciences rather than according to the dictates of the government. And it also guaranteed that free churches could legally exist and be recognized without having to be authorized by the government, have a state church. There was, of course, a glaring contradiction to this proclamation of the ideal of liberty. That was the existence and the perpetuation of slavery in the American colonies, a fact that was witnessed by the foundational documents of our nation. There were strong voices that railed against the evil of slavery. Men like John Adams and George Mason and Thomas Jefferson argued long and hard for the abolition of slavery in the new United States of America. But opposition from the southern colonies forced a compromise, and to secure their united support in the revolt against Britain, Jefferson's clause insisting on the elimination of slavery was removed from the final version of the Declaration of Independence. And nearly a century would pass before we could rid this country of that evil, and we are still suffering the after effects to this day. The reality and the depth of this philosophical and moral and political conflict over the issue of slavery at the beginning of our nation is evident when we look at the lives of men like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and listen to what they said. They found themselves facing a deep and difficult moral dilemma, both personally and politically. On the one hand, these men were adamantly opposed to the idea of slavery. They found it unreasonable and indefensible. Yet they lived under a government whose laws recognized and protected the institution of slavery, in a society which benefited from the continuation of slavery, and in a culture where the majority of people viewed Africans as inferior, incapable of self-government, and suited for slavery. For some, the conclusion was that slavery was perhaps necessary, even if only temporarily, possibly even good. Others, like Washington, did what they could to free the slaves who were under their control. And still others, like John Adams, refused to take any part in the slave trade, continued to advocate for full freedom for all. Now, I offer this as food for thought for another day. But I want us to consider how we think about another form of slavery, one that Jesus described in his argument with the Pharisees, slavery to sin, and a very similar dilemma in which we find ourselves today in the good old US of A. You see, you and I live in a nation which formally espouses respect for the idea of righteousness, justice. We say in the Pledge of Allegiance that we are a republic, one nation under God, with liberty and justice for all. And as Christians, we say we believe in righteousness. We think that righteousness is a good thing. But our system of laws recognizes and protects, even perpetuates, unrighteousness, sin. Think of the rapid spread of state-sponsored gambling, for instance, or the history of breaking treaties with Native American tribes. Our economy benefits from the expansion and promotion of unrighteousness. Take your pick of a host of commercials on any television broadcast. The vast majority of people in our society think that people are suited for sin, that it's normal and therefore necessary and good. And the list here is very long. Gambling, adultery, sexual immorality, cheating, lying, despising others, drunkenness, vulgar speech, idolatry, killing the unborn, mocking God, on and on and on and on. When I consider the ideals expressed in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the U.S., and the historical accomplishment of the founding of this nation, in my estimation, the formation of the United States represents the highest achievement with regard to the institution of a system of government in all of human history. The creation of the American government was unprecedented and unparalleled, altogether remarkable, maybe even providential in every sense of the word. Sadly, we have not yet achieved what we set out to establish, but it's still the best the world has seen so far. The problem, however, is not that we haven't simply lived up to our ideals. The problem is more deeply rooted. The problem is that human government cannot by itself bring about the kind of freedom that allows a nation to flourish. It is simply beyond the power of any government to do that. John Adams, the first vice president and our second president, said, "We have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. Avarice, ambition, revenge, or gallantry would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net." Our Constitution is designed only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate for any other. That is, for any other type of people. Our Constitution and the system of government, our laws, are built upon the assumption of the reality of human sinfulness and the need to guard against putting power in any one person or agency or branch of government or political party. Again, John Adams, "The fundamental article of my political creed is that despotism or unlimited sovereignty or absolute power is the same in a majority of a popular assembly, an aristocratical council, an oligarchical junto, and a single emperor." What the founders recognized was that we need a government that will constrain our sinfulness, lest we collapse under the weight of our own self-centered desires. True freedom requires restraint. But government is limited in its power to restrain. It can only assist us. True freedom requires restraint that comes from a power that is greater than that which governments wield. It must come from within, and it must come from God. We can see this in our history, in our society, and in our own lives. The truth is that sin corrupts, always. Sin uses an opening, any opening, to bring about our destruction. Consider how freedom in our country has been abused through the corruption of sin. The free market system of trade that allowed personal and economic flourishing, when left without any restraining government controls, led to the concentration of wealth and power in a few families, who then used their wealth and power to influence legislation that protected their financial empires and preserved their powers. People still trying to do that. The backlash of resentment and anger led to popular movements that sometimes became violent, rioting, looting, burning down properties, shuttering industries, and bringing immense damage to communities. Or consider the problems that have come from the freedom to worship, which, by the way, also includes the freedom to not worship. Founders were quick to point out that atheists' beliefs must be protected, along with those of minority religions, including religions which the founders distrusted, such as Catholicism. Excuse me. Because our cardinal freedoms protect the freedom of worship, within our borders, we have permitted the inclusion and protection of toxic and dangerous religious communities that would use our freedom to gain power with the goal of enslaving people under their governance. Think of Islamists, think of the KKK, similar white supremacist groups, radical atheism. Politics, laws, government, they are necessary, but they cannot solve our problem. You have no doubt heard the assertion that, you quote, "you cannot legislate morality." I've always thought that that was a silly statement. Every piece of legislation, whether it's anything, even regulatory or bureaucratic, is an attempt to legislate morality. Every law makes a moral statement or is based upon some moral assumptions. Every law declares some action to be morally good and necessary or morally bad and to be prohibited. But I do understand what the gist of that statement is meant to assert. You can't use legislation to produce moral goodness in a person or in a society. But you can pass morally good legislation, laws that encourage or protect good morality. And we should keep working toward that end, especially since we live in a representative democracy where we have the power and the responsibility to influence what happens in the governance of our city, state, and nation. And because my mom has gone home to be the Lord and isn't here to tell us to do that. Laws, even good laws, won't produce moral goodness in our nation or in a person, in any of us. The best that laws and systems of government can do is to limit the damage of sin by rewarding good behavior and punishing bad behavior. Laws can make it easier or possible for people to flourish within a community or a nation, but ultimately it comes down to the heart. Because that is where sin resides. And that ultimately is the only place where it can be defeated. It's only when the heart is changed that a person can be freed from the corrupting power of sin. It's only when your heart is changed, when God puts a new heart in you, when you have new desires, then you can be really free. That's why everyone needs to be born again. Not just going to church, but actually born again as a follower of Jesus Christ. True freedom comes when the Spirit of God plants within you a desire to be righteous and the power to do what is right, whether or not the government approves of it, whether or not the culture supports it. True freedom from sin is more than just forgiveness. Forgiveness is a powerful gift in itself. True freedom from sin is freedom from the power of sin that dominates and drives us, that compels us to do what's contrary to the will of God, contrary to what I really need. It's freedom to do what is right, not to do whatever I want. Doing whatever I want is what got me in trouble in the first place. True freedom is freedom from sin's power to deceive me, to confuse me about what is true. True freedom is freedom from sin's power to mislead me, to guide me into wrongdoing, into spiritual and personal danger. True freedom is freedom from sin's power to trap me in self-destructive behavior and toxic thinking and warp my sense of what is good and what is true, what is right and what is beautiful. And Jesus gave his disciples a simple solution to the problem of being a slave to sin and its power to compel us, to deceive us, to mislead us, and to twist us. It isn't an easy solution, but it's a simple solution. And it is this: if you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And the only way to be free from enslavement to sin is to know the truth. Not just truth in general. The truth that Jesus is referring to is his word, his teaching. Knowing the truth of Jesus' teaching comes from submitting my thinking and my desires and my opinions and my values and my choices to him. It is putting them all underneath his word so that I am informed and guided by his word in everything. I choose to live according to his word instead of according to how I'm feeling today. I choose to hold that what he says is true instead of what the people on my Instagram reel say are true. I choose to take the entirety of his word as the basis for my life instead of picking certain things that I like from his teaching. Holding to his teaching, knowing what he says, that's where it starts. If you aren't reading his word, studying it for yourself, you can't know the truth. Once you know it, you have to follow it. You have to commit to it, not just put it on a nice sign on your desk. You commit entirely. His word governs all of your life, not just Sundays, not just your religious habits, your relationships, your business dealings, your entertainment choices, your finances, your politics, your recreation, your family life, your goals, your loves, your everything. When you follow Jesus, when you adhere to his teaching, you find that the Holy Spirit will begin to develop what I call taste buds in you for righteousness. Taste buds for righteousness. you'll find a desire for what is good begins to replace your desires for what you used to want to do. And so instead of following your own selfish desires, you find yourself wanting to do good to everyone who's around you, and that gives you joy. Instead of looking for what you can get away with, what are the loopholes in the law? You look for what you can do that's good, that is positive, that brings good, that pleases God and builds His kingdom. You vote differently when you're following Jesus. Instead of voting for the person who promises you money or to give you something or to claims to represent the party you've always voted for in the past, you vote for what lines up with God's ways and what builds goodness and what spreads righteousness. Assuming we get a choice. That's true freedom. I'm grateful for this country. I'm grateful for the chance to live in the country founded on principles that promote liberty and equality, that had godly people involved in its founding. They weren't all godly, but a lot of them were. A country where we still enjoy numerous freedoms, especially the freedom to assemble, to worship, have a free press, to speak freely without fear that you'll be arrested for saying something that the current party in power doesn't approve. And I'm grateful that the principles on which our nation was built still have the strength to hold us up as a united people. But I know better than to put my trust in horses or princes, in platforms or political parties or economic systems or legislation or executive orders. I know that liberty is more than the name of a statue in New York's harbor. And it doesn't come from having political party, political power, or wealth, or military might. I know that liberty is never just being able to do what you want. True liberty is the freedom to do what is good, the freedom to do what is right, to be free from the compulsion to sin, from the deception and the falsehood of the enemy that traps us in self-destructive behavior and corruption. True liberty builds the kingdom of God. And that's the only adequate foundation for any truly free person or family or community or nation. Because only when we're ruled by God, when His kingdom is what governs our thoughts, our desires, our motives, our choices, our families, and our governments, only then are we truly free. Only then are we truly free. It's only in the kingdom of God, when He rules over us, we're submitted to that rule, that we can find true freedom.